Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, may consider the possibility of a strike against the leadership of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the head of the power structures of this state. According to many observers, it is precisely with this intention of the American president that the concentration of American armed forces around Iran and constant threats may be associated. Donald Trump to the Iranian leadership, which the American president advises to conclude a deal as soon as possible. But the obvious thing is that all these threats sound in the background of the actual pressure by the regime of protests in Iran. When the Iranian protesters expected that Donald Trump would really strike at the headquarters of the Islamic Republic, and Trump himself called on the protesters, practically nothing happened as a result of storming government buildings. And Trump explained to reporters that he had convinced himself. Now the troops are again pulling together to Iran, and Trump may again consider the possibility of strikes against the leadership of the Islamic Republic, but already in the situation. The practical absence of mass protests. Yes, I admit that the President of the United States can count that in the event of such attacks on the top leadership of the Islamic Republic, protests will break out again. However, those who claim that missile strikes alone cannot destroy a hostile regime are also right. Trump, in fact, may not even seek to destroy the regime of the Islamic Republic, but to repeat what, in his opinion, he has already succeeded in Venezuela. When, after the abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who now has to present before American justice, his associates went to cooperate with Washington and are ready to energy interaction. Perhaps Trump believes that something similar can happen with Iran. When the top leaders of the Islamic Republic are killed as a result of the strikes of the American army, the remaining ones will understand that it is necessary to conclude an agreement that will deliver point on Iran's nuclear program and reduce the range of ballistic missiles that are in service with the Iranian army, which, in fact, should somewhat calm the region and ensure Israel's security. However, first of all, we do not even know what the real results of the actions of the President of the United States in Venezuela are. The Chavista leadership that remained after Maduro does not really seek to aggravate relations with the United States, but claims that it is institutionally in Venezuela. Something has seriously changed, and that Russia and China will not have influence on this country in the future is still quite difficult. United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio acknowledged that Venezuela's transition to democracy is enough a long-term process, but again did not explain how the administration of President Trump is going to get the Venezuelan leadership to hold fair elections that could really lead to power. Those whom he supports, the Venezuelan people. Moreover, Trump himself, as is known, expressed doubts about the authority of the leader of the Venezuelan opposition, until he managed to get someone else's Nobel medal. It may be even more difficult with the Islamic Republic. Iran enjoys much more support, I would say, the interest of Moscow and Beijing than Venezuela. The governance structures of Iran are much more seriously formed than the governance structures of Venezuela, and have a much more obvious ideological component. Because in countries like Venezuela, left-wing radical views were very often just a cover for the transition to usurpation of power, which was carried out by Hugo Chavez. And in Iran, there is a real theocracy, which was established in power, not at all through elections, thanks to which Venezuela became a left-wing radical republic. And thanks to the 1979 revolution, the people who govern Iran today were ready for mass demonstrations and sacrifices in the name of their Europe. The authorities and their own idea of what Iran should look like, and to assert that such a regime can be destroyed by missile bombing alone, and that such a regime will agree to an agreement with the United States. Just because a group of its leaders will die, it means not understanding the essence of such regimes themselves. And this, by the way, is what a variety of people can talk to Trump about. And Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and the monarchs of the Persian Gulf, who understand what the level of destabilization in the region could be if the United States strikes at the leadership of Iran. And most importantly, if the Iranian leadership decides to respond to this strike, which is by no means excluded either. And the question arises, what will this answer be? Will it be an attempt of another rocket attack on Israel? Military facilities and cities, or this time the Ayatollah regime will try to hit American military facilities in the Middle East, which in turn will lead to even greater destabilization. However, the most important thing is that we understand about Venezuela as well. This is what we understand about Iran too, is that President Trump, in his desire to establish himself in those regions, where an obviously anti-American is in power, mode not ready to use the armed forces as such, that he fears that casualties among American servicemen are, of course, inevitable. If it is necessary to change any hostile regime, it will lead to outrage of its electoral system bases, and this is on the eve of the very by-elections of November this year, which can lead to the triumph of the Democrats, if not in two, then in one House of Congress. But if there are two, then we are well aware that Donald Trump cannot be impeached, and his political career will end much sooner than we can imagine. And Trump represents it well. He has already been through trials after his first term of office. He does not want to be a defendant again at the age of 80. Therefore, with all the readiness to threaten, the President of the United States does not want to really take risks. This means that any of his foreign policy calculations are doomed, at least in 2026, to, if not defeat, then a serious correction. And most importantly, Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, and even Caracas understand this very well. He understands well where those red lines are that Trump cannot afford to cross, given the by-election, and his desire to maintain a Republican majority in Congress and thus not to lose the votes of those American voters who, voting for Trump himself, expected that the United States would certainly no longer interfere in any major international conflict, and that there would be no American servicemen anywhere but America itself. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel. Subscribe to it. Subscribe to my social networks, to the channels in the Baymekofi and Donatella Patreon that help develop these resources. Use the sponsorship function in YouTube itself. Peace to you.